All right, so we're here to talk about the Live Beyond the Norms podcast episode. Dr. Josh Hellman was one of my guests on a longevity summit. I'm releasing those episodes onto the podcast, Live Beyond the Norms. Oh, you can't do the Live Beyond the Norms there. And so I'm excited to connect with you, to kind of provide some value to the audience who's listening right now, so they are convinced they need to go check out the episode. The title of the episode is How Mold Exposure, Metals, and Chemicals Sabotage Your Health. For those who don't know, maybe in my audience, Dr. Josh Hellman is an MD. He's a Harvard-trained physician, and he's licensed in 14 states. Is that still correct? You're licensed in 14 states?
Yeah, I'm still licensed in 14 states. I still trained at Harvard undergrad and Harvard Med School.
Good. Your training hasn't changed. That's awesome. So we really focused on detoxing, and in some cases it was detoxing from harmful substances like DDT. I know a lot of what you talk about on a day-to-day basis is brain related. So let's talk about, right, so your kind of logo on your website is Green Brains MD. I'll post that in the chat here in a second. But talk a little bit about what you think in terms of detoxing. How important is detoxing for the brain and for our overall health?
Excuse me. Yeah, Chris, it's great to be doing this preparation before the interview. I think detoxification is important for every organ in the body, including the brain, no question, because, we know that people with, say, lead toxicity, they're thinking they can go mad just from a heavy metal like lead. So detoxification is important for your whole body, including the brain. The brain is extremely metabolically active, so it makes sense that the brain is sensitive to toxins.
And so that's the brain. Talk about like kind of overall health and maybe even into longevity, since it's a longevity podcast.
Sure. So in longevity, and to me, this is new information in the last dozen years, but we now know that toxins, the way that they're toxic is not only do they hurt you, maybe make you sick to your stomach, many, or actually most of them, will actually advance the biologic clock. So it will age you prematurely. And the flip side is, if you can get those toxins outside of your body, your biologic age can then go backwards.
And so have you done any of the biological age testing, like
the glyco check?
Yeah. And then my DNAge, have you looked at those?
Yeah, and those are all powerful, and there are other ones too. You can look at length of telomeres, and frankly though, like the easiest test of aging we all learned growing up, which is you look at someone's face and say, hey, you look really young, or you look like you're 100 years old.
You know what this makes me think? I have been to a number of like biohacking conferences, and I'll look at the booth of people and they don't necessarily look that healthy. And I'm kind of thinking in my mind that I don't think I want to try that protocol, right? Because if ostensibly all of them are on the protocol, it's not working. Like, so that's a great point.
Right.
I don't know if you've had that kind of similar experience.
Yeah, totally. Or if you're looking to lose weight and your doctor is extremely obese, like maybe you don't know what you're trying to teach me.
Yeah, and there is some truth, because not all great coaches, right, in athletics were necessarily great players, right? So I'm aware that it's possible that you might. In fact, I've always had this understanding. I played semi-professional soccer, and I worked really hard just to be that good. And by the way, the difference between semi-professional and professional is just light years. Like, I would have had to train, I don't know, 1,000 times harder, and I was already training really hard. And but in my mind, you really, if soccer came super easy to somebody, then they might not make a great coach, right? Because they don't understand the struggle. I don't know if you kind of sit into that camp.
Yeah, no, I agree with you there, and I'll just tell you my own personal experience taking care of professional athletes. For example, I saw one gentleman who was who used to work, professional football player for the Oilers. He was brought into my emergency room 20 years ago in Florida here, and he came in as a code. His heart wasn't going, he wasn't breathing, and we were able to bring him back. He was over 70 years old. We were able to bring him back, and I think because as a professional athlete, he had trained his heart and the rest of his body to the point where he had much more reserves than the average 70-year-old. So it was a great, because unfortunately, normally, only 5% of patients can you resuscitate if they've had a code outside the hospital. But he was one of the success stories, and I think it's because through 20 years or however long he was training as a professional, he had backed up his organs in his body and had the reserve. And that's great with your experience in soccer that you probably have reserves that the average person your age doesn't have.
Yeah, I hope so. I met some friends from college, so about the time that I was playing soccer, and they shared with me, "Oh, you look great," and I was like, "I better, because I work really hard. like I'm training a lot. I'm not overtraining. Just all of these things that are going into the effort." So I was very appreciative of that, and yeah, I remember the father of a friend of mine was, I think he ended up either hit by a car. I think it will go with hit by a car. And the doctor said the only reason he lived is at the time he was running, like he was jogging. And the only reason he really lived was because he was in such great shape that he was able to, have some resilience. So if for no other reason, like, people in our circle, Dr. Josh, talk about you've got to have movement. That's absolutely true. And one of the reasons is so that you can have resilience in really extreme situations. One of the things
100%.
I want to put some more kind of teasers out there. One of the things that we talked about is really detoxing fatty, right? So and I think this was in the context of there are some situations when people start losing lots of weight that some toxins are stored in fat, and then those toxins end up getting released. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Oh, sure. So it turns out that many of the toxins we face as humans in today's environment are fatty, and some of those are so-called natural. So, for example, mold toxins, black mold toxins, things like trichothecenes, they are naturally fatty compounds. And then you have man-made compounds that are fatty, like forever chemicals that are, if you ever used a Teflon pan or have clothing that's nonstick, those are made out of forever chemicals. Both of those are fatty, and both of those will collect in fatty tissues in your body, including the brain, which is one of the fattest tissues or fatty organs in the body.
And that just sounds horrifying, right? Like, okay, one, interesting that our body tends to store toxins in fat, but two, when you throw it into the context that the brain is one of the fattier organs, now you're like, we're storing toxins in our brain. That's terrifying. What? So I just posted that you've got a free giveaway in the comments. It's top 10 supplements for preventing and reversing Alzheimer's. So people are able to go get that for free. Just follow that link. It's a Linktree link. It's the first link. I'm looking at it right now. One of the things we touched on, and I think this was really, I mean, the fact that we've been getting microplastics in our systems, and there's probably been people aware of it for years, if not decades now. But for me, it was really coming to the forefront when we did our interview. Talk about like what's happening with microplastics. Why do these need to be a concern? And maybe like something that we could do about it.
Yeah, so this is definitely extremely concerning to me and to other people once they hear it and they realize it. It's, you think of plastic as something useful in society, and we use it in so many different places and ways, developed since being used heavily since the 1950s. Unfortunately, these plastics, they break down, as you said, microplastics and nanoplastics, and many of them are biologically active. For example, endocrine disruptors. They may look like estrogen or other hormones. But what we now find is, as since the 1950s, these plastics, 91% of it do not get recycled. So where do they go? They end up going into the environment. And unfortunately, because they're in the environment, they end up in our food supply, and then they end up inside of us. So, so this is, it's horrific. But you know, the latest calculation is that the average American eats a credit card worth of plastic every single week. And you know what? Even if it's only every month, that's still way too much, in my opinion. And we don't have, well, first of all, every organ we've looked at in the human body, we find plastic. But my focus is reversing Alzheimer's. I'm worried that, you know, you've got fatty plastics embedded in your brain, but the good news is there are things that you can do about it. Number one, you can, you know, one of the sources is water. You know, you can make sure you're drinking filtered water that doesn't have these plastics and toxins. And then you can also, there are ways to push these fatty toxins out of the body, things like something called phosphatidylcholine. And actually in my clinic now, or reversing Alzheimer's clinic, we're using something called total plasma exchange, where you basically take out a good portion of your blood, you put it through a filter, and then you eliminate all the plastics and the proteins, and then you put it back in the other arm. So there is hope, but I think the first step is just realization that this isn't good for us, despite, you know, I think back in the 1950s, people were like, well, it must be good, you know, no one's ever died from plastic. And unfortunately, we're finding many chronic diseases, plastics and other toxins are one of the linchpins behind it.
Do we have any idea of, so we know microplastics, and I think we can all agree, like, I would like to not have any microplastics in my body in general, right? In my stomach, in my, you know, actually in my body, in my brain. Do we know, like, what are the detrimental impacts, or are we still kind of discovering that?
I think we're still discovering it. I think there are different categories. Like, we know that these microplastics are associated with increased risk of cancer, also increased risk of obesity, because you can imagine if you're ingesting plastics that are triggering estrogen receptors in your body, that in turn can cause cells to accumulate more and more fat, specifically the fat cells. And we also know that, you know, if you have fatty molecules or plastics in your organs, you know, it's not designed for that. What, to me, the scary part is the plastics that can travel the furthest and widest are the smallest, so-called the nanoplastics. The microplastics are much larger, the scale of a micron, the width of a human hair, as opposed to the nanoplastics are going to be so small that they can literally go anywhere in your body, in the bloodstream or the lymphatics, including the brain. So my concern is that there's a physical deformation when these plastics get embedded in different tissues. But the truth is, we don't have a lot of good data in humans yet. But I'm one of these people, I believe in the precautionary principle. Just because we don't have proof, you know, a double-blind placebo control. The problem is you can't do a placebo control. Where in the world are you going to go that doesn't have plastics? We now are finding these plastics in clouds. They're everywhere. They're on the bottom of the sea. They're in the clouds. They're everywhere in the rainwater. So this is a big experiment humans have been doing since the 1950s, and I'm worried it's not ending well.
Yeah, I think that's more, you know, it's not that we know that they're bad. It's like we should be terrified that how bad they could be, right? Because you have to kind of intuitively think at some level our bodies are going to try and fight these, treat them as foreign bodies. What does that mean? And if we have microplastics throughout our body, we already kind of have an inflammation epidemic, right? That's just going to be, attacked and is going to exacerbate inflammation in the body. Does that sound right?
That's exactly right, Chris.
Terrifying. Terrifying. All right, so we're connected today to talk about Dr. Josh's episode on the Live Beyond the Norms podcast. The episode is titled How Mold Exposure, Metals, and Chemicals, probably should have added microplastics, How Mold Exposure, Metals, and Chemicals Sabotage Your Health. That was actually released October 22nd. There is a link in the comments of this live where you can go there and in this post where you can find that episode. Maybe you want to watch that episode on YouTube. There is a full video of it. There is also a link to the whole YouTube where you can find all of the Live Beyond the Norms podcasts, and then also a link to the Live Beyond the Norms website. Talk a little bit about, maybe give one teaser, because you've got a freebie. The link is also in the comments. It's Linktree, so that's linktr and then .ee at Green Brains MD, but it's also in the comments. Give us one teaser. You were looking at the top 10 supplements to prevent or reduce Alzheimer.
Yes. So one of those supplements actually turns out to be the supplement creatine, because we know that creatine, sure, 95% of it is in your muscles to help build large muscles, but we now know, and this is new information, certainly in the last 10 years, that creatine is also a neurotransmitter, and that if we can optimize the amount of creatine in your body, specifically 5 grams a day, that your brain function potentially will be optimized too.
Yeah, I can tell you I'm sold on creatine on so many levels. We've got a question. Should women take creatine?
The answer is yes. I would say any adult should look at creatine not just as an anti-aging, but to help with brain function.
Yeah, my first exposure to creatine was, working out, trying to optimize my physical response, trying to build muscle, and it does a really cool job of when you first start dosing with creatine, it'll actually take moisture and put it into your muscle cells, so you get a little bit of volume. You do need to be careful. That can cause some dehydration, so you might get some cracked lips or whatever. Make sure you're hydrating significantly. But then your body kind of balances out, and creatine is something that I'm taking regularly. And yeah, the more you read about creatine, the more you're not the more you should take, but the more it should be in your stack for sure. So great. You can find that again in the comments. We've got a Linktree link for Dr. Josh, and it's top 10 supplements to prevent Alzheimer's and reverse Alzheimer's. That's pretty phenomenal. Well, I think unless you've got anything else you want to bring up, I think this is a good teaser.
Yep.
Go out, find the episode, download the episode, listen to the episode maybe multiple times. Josh has graciously invited me to be on his podcast. His podcast is also in the Linktree, I believe so. If not, then you can at least get to the YouTube channel and find the podcast. It's probably in there. I just don't happen to see it right now. So also go subscribe to his podcast, so then you can see my episode when that comes out. And anything else to wrap up?
Oh, no, just Chris, thank you so much for interviewing me. And this is an extremely important topic. And I want to plug you now, because you're behind this whole movement with this amazing antioxidant C60, and I've seen it help optimize patients' thinking with Alzheimer's and other conditions. And I'm a real fan of yours, Chris, and I want to help promote you too.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate that. I do try very hard. I want the podcast and the things that I'm doing on social media to be almost exclusively about the audience. At some point, they'll be interested and want to know what it is. I will share this. You mentioned C60, and we do really like to think about C60 as a molecule. This is the molecule for industrial applications, and then when you process that properly for human consumption, we call it ESS60. And just one last little plug, I did write a book about the entire experience, the development of and transition of C60 into ESS60 for human consumption, which is responsible for the single longest longevity experimental result in history, a full 90% extension of life. But thank you for the opportunity to do that.
And I think it's amazing that you went from professional soccer player to helping promote a molecule that looks like a soccer ball. I think that's so cool.
Isn't that crazy? Yeah, no, there's really some amazing synergies here. Yeah, if I had played, American football, then maybe we would be talking about T70, which is actually an oblong-shaped one. Well, Dr. Josh, we managed to get through the technical difficulties. Thank you for connecting with me. I look forward to recording an episode with you.
Perfect. I can't wait. And everyone, thanks for watching this, and have a great day.